In Athens, Georgia, there is an 80-year-old black woman named Sylvia, and she has severe ulcers covering her ankles, so her mobility is, incredibly limited.
Right.
She has been unhoused for nearly a decade, and one night, after missing the very last bus to a shelter, she's forced to walk for 3 hours.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So exhausted, she just sits down on a bench at a local shopping center and falls asleep.
And you'd think maybe a social worker shows up, right, to offer her a ride or some housing
Right,
assistance.
exactly.
But instead, she's woken up by the police, and she is issued a formal criminal trespass warning.
A criminal trespass warning just for sleeping on a bench.
Exactly. So she is legally barred from returning to that property for 2 years. I mean, her very
Okay.
presence there, simply sitting on a bench it basically becomes an arrestable offense.
Which is just, it's so hard to wrap your head around. But then, you travel less than 80 miles away to Midtown Atlanta and you meet Gregory Gold.
Right, the condo owner.
Right. He's a condo owner, and his homeowners association is currently spending $100,000 a year on private security and daily cleanup.
$100,000. That's a massive budget.
It is. And why? Because of encampments springing up literally in their stairwells. I mean, residents are dealing with human feces on their doorsteps. They're being physically threatened while just trying to take out the trash.
Yeah, it really is this stark, just jarring collision of realities, On one hand, you have this highly vulnerable population that's criminalized for just existing in a public space when they have nowhere else to go.
Yeah.
And then on the other hand, you have residents and business owners who feel, frankly, completely abandoned by their local government's failure to maintain just basic public safety.
Exactly. So if you live in Georgia, you're basically caught in the middle of this impossible tug of war. We have vulnerable people who literally have nowhere to go and residents who feel completely abandoned. So how is the state balancing these two complete and valid yet opposing crises?
It's a really tough question.
It really is. So today, in this deep dive, we're unpacking these colliding realities to build the perfectly homeless state score for Georgia. We're going to evaluate how the state handles housing, policy, enforcement, and just daily life to generate a final score by the end.
Right. And to really understand how these numbers translate to the street level, we have to look at the people actually affected by this, right?
Yeah, exactly. So how many people are we talking about in Georgia right now?
So as of the 2023 count, we're looking at 12,294 Georgians experiencing homelessness on any given night.
Wow. Over 12,000.
Yeah. And that is a nearly 21% jump since 2017. And you really need to look at the demographics to see where the systemic cracks are. Because Black Georgians make up 58% of the unhoused population.
Wait, 58%, but they're a much smaller percentage of the overall state population, right?
Exactly. They're only 12% of the state's total population.
That is a staggering disparity.
It really is. And, it's not just single adults, which is the stereotype I think a lot of people picture in their heads.
Right, the guy flying a sign on the off-ramp.
Yeah. Exactly. But we're actually talking about over 3,500 people in families with children, plus significant numbers of veterans and older adults like Sylvia.
And geographically, I know it's highly concentrated in metro Atlanta, but what about the rest of the state?
Well, that's the thing. While it's highly visible in Atlanta, rural areas are showing surprisingly high per capita rates, too.
Really?
Yeah. The major driver across the board is just a severe deficit in affordable housing that really accelerated post-COVID-19.
Okay, so the numbers are spiking everywhere, mostly because of the housing shortage. To understand how the state responds to that, we have to look at their most recent and aggressive legislative responses, which brings us to our first scorecard category: criminalization and enforcement.
Right. And this is where things get really intense because the state has shifted away from local discretion to state-mandated enforcement.
What do you mean by local discretion?
Well, historically, if a city's shelters were full, the local mayor or the police chief could just decide, not to aggressively sweep a park that night.
Oh, like, hey, it's freezing tonight, let's just leave them be.
Exactly. But recently, the state legislature passed Senate Bill 62. And that essentially outlaws that kind of local discretion. So cities are banned from adopting policies that stop the enforcement of public camping bans.
Wait, so the state is forcing the cities to sweep the camps?
Yes. And this legislation was actually heavily influenced by the Cicero Institute. Their underlying argument is basically that public spaces belong to the entire community, right? So when cities allow encampments to take over parks, it deprives the rest of the public of safe access.
Okay, I can see that side of it. They're saying that turning a blind eye doesn't actually help the unhoused. It just degrades the city for everybody else.
Right, exactly. But the enforcement mechanism is where it gets legally aggressive. The law allows citizens to seek a court order. It's called a writ of mandamus that literally forces cities to clear the camps.
Wow. So a citizen can sue to force a sweep.
Yes, and it goes even further with House Bill 295. This one was modeled on the Goldwater Institute's Safe Neighborhoods Act, and it basically weaponizes civil litigation.
Meaning property owners can sue the city for money.
Yes, it allows property owners to sue local governments for lost property value and mitigation costs if the cities fail to enforce laws against camping and loitering.
Oh my God. So that condo owner in Midtown, Gregory Gould, who's spending 100 grand on security.
He could potentially sue the city to recoup that money, provided he can prove a pervasive failure by the city to enforce the law.
That's wild. Is anyone actually doing this yet?
Yeah, down in Macon, there's a resident named Andrew Eck, and he uses the threat of these exact laws to pressure the city to clear out camps along the Okmulgee Heritage Trail.
It sounds like the state has engineered a massive game of whack-a-mole, but the mallet is a civil lawsuit against the city.
That's a really good way to put it. Municipal code enforcement departments are terrified. They're pressured to continuously sweep camps out of fear of bankrupting the city's general fund.
But if cities are forced to sweep these camps, where are they actually expecting people to go? Because the real-life impact here is that people are constantly displaced. They get hit with criminal trespass warnings, like Sylvia.
Right. And once you have an arrest record for trespassing, finding future housing becomes even harder. This creates a major obstacle for people trying to regain stability.
Yeah, I mean, it's a vicious cycle.
Yeah.
And because of this heavy emphasis on punitive measures and, the looming threat of municipal lawsuits, it's time for our draft score.
Okay, let's hear it.
Given everything we just discussed, our preliminary score for Georgia is a D.
A D.
Okay,
Yeah,
that's pretty rough.
it is. But I want to remind you listening that the score is preliminary. It's subject to change as we evaluate the services and the infrastructure that are meant to catch the people being displaced.
Right, because since people are legally being pushed out of public parks, we really need to examine the shelter system they're supposed to enter, right? Which brings us to shelter access.
Exactly. So what does the ground reality look like for shelters in Georgia? Well, currently, 52% of Georgia's unhoused population is unsheltered.
Over half.
Over half. That's the highest rate since 2012. Now, Atlanta does have the Gateway Center, which serves as a great coordinated access point, and they run the Low Barrier Evolution Center for men. But overall, the physical capacity just does not match the need.
Okay, so there aren't enough beds. But I also saw something in SB 62 about a drop-off ban. What is that about?
Yeah, so SB 62 includes this strict drop-off ban. Basically, hospitals and local governments are legally prohibited from transporting a homeless individual outside of their immediate county of residence or operation.
Wait, really? Why?
Well, if they do, they are financially liable for the costs incurred by the receiving county. The idea was to stop cities from basically busing their homeless populations to other towns to make it someone else's problem.
Okay, I understand the intention there, but wait. So if a rural county doesn't have a specialized shelter, the law essentially traps that person in a county with no resources just to protect another county's budget.
Exactly. That is the real-life impact. Rural individuals who might need specialized shelter or medical services in a larger city like Atlanta are legally geographically isolated.
Wow, that's fun.
Yeah, this significantly weakens the overall picture because the system actually prevents people from getting to the help they need.
Right, so if the shelters are full or inaccessible and sleeping on a park bench gives you a trespass warning, where do people go? I mean, a lot of them retreat to their cars. Which brings us to vehicle dwelling friendliness.
Right, and the policy context here is fascinating because at the state level, there is actually no law explicitly outlawing sleeping in a car.
Oh, really? I assumed it was banned across the board.
Nope. In fact, if you go to a 24-hour state highway rest area, the state legally permits what they call normal, customary, and temporary use for sleeping, and there's no hourly limit.
Wait, no hourly limit? That's actually huge. Because I know Florida and North Carolina have really strict hourly limits for their rest stops.
Yeah, it's a surprising loophole in Georgia, but there are caveats. You cannot camp outside the car. And if you go to a visitor information center, overnight stays are banned entirely.
Okay, so the highway is relatively safe. But what happens when you leave the highway?
That's the local trap. Once a vehicle dweller enters a city, like Atlanta or Savannah, they face this crazy maze of local ordinances banning overnight parking.
Right, because you can't just park on a residential street.
Exactly. And sleeping in a commercial lot like a Walmart requires explicit permission from the property owner, or you risk getting towed.
And if your car gets towed, you just lost your house.
Yeah. And it gets even more precarious because if it's cold and you keep your keys in the ignition just to run the heater,
Oh, let me guess. DUI.
yes, you can get a DUI charge for having physical control of the vehicle while sleeping in it.
It's a legal minefield. Your car is your lifeboat, but dropping the anchor is illegal almost everywhere.
Exactly. And unlike some other states, Georgia has zero publicly funded safe parking programs to help transition these folks.
So there's nowhere safe to park without looking over your shoulder.
Right. This becomes a major obstacle for people trying to regain stability because they're constantly moving just to avoid tickets.
So with people constantly on the move to evade law enforcement and parking tickets, how are social services actually reaching them? Which brings us to outreach and social services.
This is actually where we see some incredible innovation, but it's almost entirely driven by the grassroots mobile hygiene movement.
Oh, I've seen this. Organizations like Hope Through Soap.
Yes, exactly. Hope Through Soap, Project Hope Water down in Savannah, and Mobile Showers Atlanta.
Mobile Showers Atlanta is the one with the huge trailer, right?
Yeah, they drive a 21-foot custom trailer with private showers and onboard Wi-Fi, so guests can take a shower and then literally apply for housing and jobs right from the street.
That is amazing. But, while these local grassroots efforts are highly innovative, where is the state in all of this?
Well, the state government is highly disconnected. A recent state audit actually revealed that Georgia has not had a comprehensive statewide strategic plan for homelessness since 2002.
Since 2002.
Yes, over 2 decades.
Wait, the state audited its own spending and realized nobody has been steering the ship on a statewide level for over 2 decades. How does a crisis get this big without a centralized plan?
It's a huge oversight. They do use the Homeless Management Information System, or HMIS, but really only for federal compliance. They aren't using it to actually coordinate a statewide response.
Wow. Okay, so the incredible on-the-ground mobile outreach helps offset challenges seen elsewhere, but the total lack of state-level strategy just severely limits its reach.
Absolutely, because mobile showers and caseworkers are vital, but their ultimate goal is to get people into permanent housing.
Right, which leads us right into housing affordability. So what kind of housing market are these caseworkers actually navigating?
An incredibly difficult one. Over the last decade, rent in Atlanta has surged by 71%.
71%. That's just unsustainable.
It is. And statewide, the inventory is just bleak. There are only 34 affordable and available units for every 100 extremely low-income households.
34 units for every 100 households that need them.
Yeah. This significantly weakens the overall picture because it makes the housing first model incredibly difficult to execute simply due to a lack of physical inventory. You can't put someone in housing first if the housing doesn't exist.
Exactly. But despite the massive housing deficit, there have to be some functioning pipelines, right? Let's look at pathways to permanent housing. What is working?
Well, the Gateway Center uses rapid rehousing for families with children, which is great for quickly getting families stabilized, and they partner with Atlanta Housing for the Haven program.
And that program provides project-based subsidies, right, where the subsidy is tied to the physical unit itself.
Right. But when you look at the funding keeping these pipelines open, it reveals a massive imbalance. Between 2018 and 2022, there was $706 million in federal funds available for these programs.
Okay, that sounds like a lot.
It is. But compared to that, there was just $158 million in state funding.
Oh, wow. So the state is barely chipping in compared to the federal government.
Exactly. And this over-reliance on federal dollars rather than state investment leaves the permanent housing pathway really vulnerable.
It's like playing musical chairs to get out of homelessness. But the state removed 66% of the chairs before the music even started.
That's entirely accurate. So we've looked at all the categories. It's time for the final assessment.
Let's recap. So for major strengths, we have that incredible, innovative mobile outreach and strong local coordinated entry systems like the Gateway Center.
Right. But the major weaknesses are really dragging them down. We're talking extreme legislative criminalization, a total lack of statewide strategic planning since 2002, and a severe affordable housing shortage.
Okay, let's run through the category grades. For housing affordability, an F.
Yeah, there's just no inventory.
For shelter access, a D. For criminalization and enforcement, an F.
Because of the lawsuit threats against cities?
Right. Vehicle dwelling friendliness. A D plus years, saved only by that state rest area loophole.
Barely.
Outreach and social services gets a B, carried entirely by local nonprofits. And pathways to permanent housing gets a C.
So when you average all of that out, the final perfectly homeless state score for Georgia is a D.
A D.
Yeah.
And just to clearly explain why Georgia earns this score, it's because its legislative priority is punishing local governments for not sweeping public spaces, rather than funding the housing and the statewide strategy needed to actually solve the root crisis.
Exactly.
Really leaves you with a final thought to mull over. By passing laws that allow property owners to sue cities for homelessness, is the state risking bankrupting the very municipal budgets that are desperately needed to build the affordable housing that would actually solve the problem?
Right. Are they just financing an endless, expensive loop of displacement?
It's a huge question. Well, that's the Perfectly Homeless State Score for Georgia. If you'd like to support the project, click on over to the Perfectly Homeless Etsy store and get yourself a warm hoodie with our logo. Or you can buy us a coffee at buymeacoffee.com/perfectlyhomeless. Every purchase and donation helps fund future episodes in this 50-state journey through homelessness in America. Wear the logo. Start a conversation. Because homelessness isn't someone else's problem anymore. It's happening in every state, every city, and more neighborhoods than most people realize. Thank you so much for watching. Let me know what you think in the comment section, and I'll see you in the next episode.